If your relationship has been touched by infidelity, whether you're the one who was betrayed, the one who had the affair, or both, I want to give you an honest picture of what recovery really looks like. Not the version that ends in 30 days, not the version where you just decide to move past it, the real one, the messy, non-linear, often years with an S on the end, years long process that research and clinical work actually shows us. If you're in the middle of this right now, I want you to know two things before we even start. First, what you're feeling, whatever it is, probably makes sense. And second, recovery is possible. Not guaranteed, but possible. Let's talk about what that actually takes. I'm Sharon, a postgraduate therapist specializing in relationship and sex therapy in Georgia, and a relationship coach, globally accessible. Affair recovery is one of the most complex and honestly one of the most misunderstood areas of couples work. I see a lot of misinformation about it on social media and even in some self help spaces. So today, I want to walk you through what clinical research and experience actually tells us what recovery is not, what the process tends to look like stage by stage, and what tends to help us versus what tends to get in the way. This video runs a bit long because I didn't want to give you a shallow version of something this important. If you want to skip to a specific section, I'll have chapters in the description. Now let's get into it. Before we talk about what recovery is, I want to clear away a few myths because I think these myths cause almost as much harm as the affair itself. It is not returning to the relationship you had before. I say this gently because I know that it's hard to hear. That relationship is gone. Not because it was necessarily a bad one, but because you can't unknow what you now know. Recovery doesn't mean rebuilding the same house, it means building a new one on the same foundation with full knowledge of what happened and why. Couples who do this tend to describe their relationship afterward as being different, sometimes worse in certain ways, but often more honest, more intentional, and paradoxically closer than what came before. It is not faster if you just avoid talking about it. Recovery does not work that way. I'll link my previous video in the description. It's called the Conversation Couples Avoid That Destroys Relationships. You may even want to pause this video, go check that one out, and then come back and finish listening. I understand the appeal of this idea. Talking about the affair is painful for both people. And people rarely acknowledge how it can be painful for the person who committed the affair or betrayed their partner, but it actually can be, and we'll talk more about that later on. But it's tempting to believe that the less you dwell on it, the sooner it will fade, right? But the research on this is fairly consistent. Couples who try to move on without processing what happened tend to have worse long term outcomes. The pain doesn't disappear when it's avoided, it tends to resurface in the betrayed partner's unresolved suspicion, in the unfaithful partner's unprocessed shame, in intimacy that never quite comes back online. Avoidance is not a shortcut, it's a detour. And there's one more myth that I want to name specifically. And remember, we're talking about a fair recovery here. It is not something that you can rush on someone else's timeline. Well meaning friends, family members, even therapists sometimes push couples towards a resolution faster than the couple is ready for. Recovery has a pace, and that pace is often slower than anyone, including the couple themselves, would actually like. There is discomfort in this healing and recovery process, and it can be uncomfortable to feel exposed and to feel as vulnerable as it takes during the affair recovery process. Because a good portion of my practice involves consensually and ethically non monogamous partners, I want to pause here and name something that I believe is important. Infidelity is not exclusive to monogamous relationships. In CNM relationships, betrayal happens when someone breaks an agreed upon boundary, sleeping with someone outside of the agreement without disclosure, hiding a connection that was supposed to be disclosed, lying about safer sex practices, or violating another explicit term of the relationship agreement. That emotional experience of betrayal, the shock, the grief, the shattered trust tends to look remarkably similar to what happens after monogamous infidelity. Even though the specific boundary that was crossed is different, everything I'm about to walk you through applies whether the relationship structure is monogamous or consensually non monogamous. What matters clinically isn't the relationship structure, but whether the agreement was broken and was trust violated. Clinically, we tend to think about affair recovery in three broad overlapping stages. And I want to be clear that these are not neat sequential boxes. Couples often move back and forth between them, especially between stages one and two. But having a map still helps because it tells you that where you are right now is a known place, not a sign that something is uniquely wrong with you. Stage one is crisis. This is the immediate aftermath, the discovery or disclosure itself, and the weeks or months that tend to follow. This stage is often characterized by shock, grief, rage, obsessive thoughts, sleep disruption, appetite changes, and difficulty concentrating. Many betrayed partners describe symptoms that closely resemble acute trauma responses, intrusive images, hypervigilance, a compulsive need to check phones or ask repetitive questions. This is not crazy or controlling behavior, even though it can feel that way from the outside. It is a nervous system trying to make sense of a reality that suddenly doesn't match what it believed to be true. Both partners tend to be dysregulated in this stage, though in different ways. The betrayed partner may be flooded with grief and hypervigilance, while the partner who had the affair may feel flooded with shame. And shame has a way of making people defensive, avoidant, or minimizing, which unfortunately tends to escalate the betrayed partner's distress instead of soothing it. The goal in this stage is not resolution, it's safety. That means establishing some very concrete things. Is the affair over? Is there ongoing contact with the affair partner? Can both people have basic physical and emotional safety in the same house? Sometimes this stage requires temporary structural changes, like a period of separation, an agreement about no contact with the third party, or simply an agreement to not make any major decisions about the relationship's future until the initial flood of crisis has settled somewhat. This stage can last from weeks to a few months, though there is no fixed timeline. Stage two is meaning making. Once the acute crisis has stabilized somewhat, the deeper work begins. This is where couples start to understand how the affair occurred, not to excuse it, but to understand it. What was happening in the relationship leading up to it? What was missing? What was possibly broken, avoided, or even unspoken? What was happening in the individual life of the partner who had the affair? Vulnerabilities, unmet needs, unresolved history, a season of life that left them more susceptible to poor decision making, and this is where accountability comes in. I want to be very clear about something here because this is where a lot of couples get stuck or hurt. Meaning making is not about blaming the betrayed partner for the affair. Nothing the betrayed partner did or didn't do makes the affair their responsibility. The person who chose to step outside of the relationship agreements is the one who made that choice. What meaning making does is build a full, honest picture of the relationship system. And this can be the conditions the affair grew in, because understanding those conditions is what can prevent repeat affairs and is often what allows both partners to make sense of what happened instead of being left with just why on an endless loop. This stage also tends to be the stage where the betrayed partner asks lots of questions, sometimes the same questions repeatedly, and this is normal. It's part of how the brain processes a shattered narrative. It slows down and it tends to move at an uneven pace. Weeks of progress, followed by a bad day triggered by an anniversary, a smell, even a text notification sound. Remember the similarity to acute trauma I mentioned earlier? There it is. Stage three is rebuilding or deciding not to. Some couples come through this process and build something genuinely stronger, a relationship with more honesty, better communication, and a level of intimacy that they didn't have before, in part because crisis forced conversations that they probably have been avoiding for years. Again, go check out my previous video. Other couples come through this process and realize with real clarity instead of reactive anger that the relationship has run its course and that ending it is the healthiest choice available. Both of these are legitimate and successful outcomes of the recovery process. Recovery doesn't mean the relationship must survive. It means both people did the work necessary to arrive at an honest, informed decision about their future, whether it be together or apart. A few patterns show up often enough in this work that I think they're worth naming directly. One is what is sometimes called trickle truth, where the partner who had the affair discloses information in small, incomplete pieces over time, whether out of fear, shame, or an attempt to protect the betrayed partner. That's not unusual. However, this tends to backfire badly. I mean, real bad. Each new piece of information essentially re traumatizes the betrayed partner and resets trust back to zero because it confirms their worst fear that they still aren't getting the whole story. Another is rushing toward premature reassurance, like, I promise it'll never happen again. I've already forgiven you. Or, let's just move forward. These statements may be said out of a genuine desire to skip the pain. Reassurance offered before the work has actually been done tends to feel hollow, and it can shut down the very conversations that need to happen. A third is isolating the betrayed partner's reaction as the problem that needs fixing instead of treating it as a natural response to a real injury. Framing someone's grief or anger as pathological, like, you need to get over this, tends to add a second wound on top of the first one that hasn't healed yet. So, what actually supports recovery? A few things show up consistently here. Let's talk about it. First up, we have radical honesty from the partner that had the affair. This means transparency, no trickle truth, and a genuine willingness to answer hard questions, even when it's uncomfortable or repetitive. It can also mean voluntarily offering access to things like phone records, accounts, only for a period of time, though, not as permanent surveillance, but as a bridge while trust is being rebuilt. Next, consistent patient support for the betrayed partner. Their reactions, like anger, withdrawal, obsessive questioning, sudden waves of grief, are normal trauma responses, not character flaws or signs that they're not moving on fast enough. Patience here matters enormously. Then we have individual work alongside the couple's work. The partner who had the affair often benefits from understanding their own contributing vulnerabilities, such as attachment history, avoidance patterns, unresolved individual issues that are personal to them, separate from the couple's sessions. The betrayed partner often benefits from individual support to process trauma responses that don't need to be processed in front of their partner every time. And also professional support. Affair recovery is one of the areas where I most strongly recommend working with a trained couples therapist, ideally one with specific experience in infidelity and betrayal trauma. This process is genuinely hard to navigate without a skilled outside perspective. There's a lot of nuance in knowing when to lean into a hard conversation and when to create space, and that's difficult to gauge from inside the relationship. Trust doesn't return through words. It returns through a long pattern of small, consistent, verifiable actions over time. This tends to look like doing what you say you'll do, being where you say you'll be, answering questions directly instead of getting defensive, tolerating your partner's doubt without punishing them for having it, and showing up the same way an ordinary Tuesday as you did during the crisis. Betrayed partners often describe trust returning not as a single moment of, okay, I believe you now, but as a gradual loosening. Fewer intrusive thoughts, less need to check, more moments of genuine ease. That loosening tends to track directly with how consistent and transparent the other partner has been over months, not weeks. Since this is an area that I specialize in, I want to address it directly because it's often the part couples feel most uncertain or most ashamed about. Sexual intimacy after an affair is often complicated, and there's no single normal timeline for it to return. Some couples find that physical closeness returns before deep emotional trust does, which can feel confusing or even wrong to them, while others find the opposite true. Emotional trust rebuilds while physical intimacy stays frozen for a long stretch. Both patterns are common. Comparison to the sex you had before the affair is usually not helpful because you're not rebuilding the old sexual relationship. You're building a new one, the same way you're building a new emotional relationship. This is another area where working with a therapist who specializes in sexuality alongside infidelity recovery can be really valuable because sexual shame, sexual grief, and sexual trust are their own distinct threads that often need direct attention rather than assuming they'll resolve automatically once the bigger emotional work is done. So, how long does it take? I get asked this question constantly, and I wish I had a clean answer. What the research and clinical experience suggests is that meaningful recovery often takes somewhere in the range of 1 to 2 years for couples who do the sustained intentional work, and for some couples, even longer. That number tends to surprise people because our culture doesn't talk about infidelity that way. We're used to narratives where a couple has had one hard conversation and then a montage of healing happens. That is just not reality. That's not what it looks like. Recovery tends to happen in a spiral rather than a straight line. Real progress punctuated by setbacks, especially around anniversaries, discovery of new details, or major life transitions like having a child or relocating. A setback doesn't mean the process has failed. It usually means a new layer is being processed. I want to say this clearly. Choosing to end a relationship after an affair is not a failure of recovery. Sometimes, through the meaning making process, one or both partners realize that the relationship's underlying issues predate the affair and they go deeper than either person initially understood. Chronic incompatibility, a pattern of broken agreements, or simply growing in different directions is enough to make this decision. Other times, one partner isn't able or willing to do the ongoing work that transparency requires, and continuing to try becomes more harmful than ending it. If you find yourself here, it doesn't mean you didn't try hard enough. It just means you tried enough to see clearly. Recovery is possible, but it is not guaranteed. And it requires both people to be willing to do genuinely hard, often uncomfortable, typically slow work over a longer timeline than most of us are prepared for as we're going in. If you're in this right now and you have questions, feel free to reach out. I love it if you love comments, but because of how sensitive this topic is, I welcome you to email me privately at hello@SharonDeniseDoe.com or schedule a consultation through my website. And of course, keeping it anonymous is always my standard. You do not have to navigate this alone, and you don't have to have it all figured out before you ask for help. Subscribe for more conversations like this one and take care of yourselves this week. And I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.